I would love to hear
one
it.
day, I came home from school, and my mother was lying on the couch, crying. She was a strong woman, pretty much ran the household. My dad was very kind, very gentle, but my mother had been a hard-headed Norwegian all her life, just like her mother was, and they were both women ahead of their times. My grandmother in South Dakota had her own business.
Oh wow, what did she do?
Millinery business in
Wow.
her husband's, my grandfather's, general store.
Mm-hmm.
And he had a pharmacy. He was a self-taught pharmacist. He'd come to the United States when he was 12 as a bonded servant with his older brother. And some way or other he learned Latin.
Wow.
And had this general store, and my grandmother had a millinery shop in there, and she went on buying trips from Bristol, South Dakota to Minneapolis on the train by herself.
Wow, and what years would these have been?
Well, this had to be in the 1800s sometime.
Wow.
Because my grandfather died before I was born, and my grandmother lived to be 96. And
Now, what year were you born in?
I was born in 1922.
1922.
February 1922.
Wow.
And I had an older brother, and my mother had been 21 when she got married. Anyway, my grandmother would go on these buying trips by herself. One time she had a piano shipped home, just
That's great.
and
But so you were saying a lineage of strong women.
yes,
and
strong
who-
women,
who-
independent women.
Yes.
And
So you
I
came
think
home and your mom was on the couch.
on the
and
couch,
This was not
crying. Yeah, crying. I don't think I'd ever seen her cry before.
good. Mm-hmm.
And so, of course, she told me that my dad had lost his job.
And you said he had run a store for
yeah,
somebody.
had been manager of a department store in town. And just that year, too, why he had had a serious illness, almost died. My brother had osteomyelitis and was in the hospital. In those days, they didn't have any health insurance.
No.
So I'm saying that because of the debts from that
That's
had
right.
been started up. Anyway, things went downhill from.
Because you had said the family that owned the store, they had a son who was unemployed, so they wanted the
Unemployed.
son
Yeah.
to take
Take
your
over.
father's
Yes,
job.
yes, and so my
Your-
father was fired. He belonged to the Chamber of Commerce and been active in the town and everything, and so, he was out. And so there were no jobs. Well, and the banks had closed before that. I don't remember just how long before that,
yeah.
that, it had hit the East Coast. But
And
that
then
was-
filtered to
yeah,
the Midwest.
To the Midwest. And,
Now you said he tried his hand at having a grocery store.
yes, their money had been taken from the bank too, but I don't know where the money came from to start the grocery store. But he had experience in merchandising. That's what he had done when he and my mother met. He was at my grandfather's store in South Dakota putting on a sale, and that's what he did, go from
Doors to store.
area and put on special sales. And so he had that sort of experience, so they bought a little grocery store, and I don't know where the money came from. But by that time, the Depression was hitting pretty hard, and he tried to get other jobs. And, there just weren't hiring, so he had to stock buy stock for the store. It was already in existence.
Right.
But
You said people
then
came in.
people came in, gave him a hard luck story that, they needed to buy food on credit because their family was hungry. And so he would give them credit. Well, of course, then the store went broke. Then he sold door to door Watkins products. And he also sold Electrolux vacuum cleaners door to door. And he would clean carpets with this
Machine.
just anything to get work. My mother, like I say, had come from a, they were considered well-to-do because my grandfather owned timberland and 2 or 3 farms in South Dakota, and had enough money that after he died, my grandmother moved to California, and she was taken advantage of financially, and buddy had talked her out of a lot of money buying land here in California. Come to find out they had no title to it, and so they had her money, but she didn't have any land, but she had a nice house and everything. So anyway, then my mother cleaned houses, and then they sold finally. We were just broke. They owed money to doctors and everything. And of course I wasn't aware of it at that time because I was still in grammar school. Of course this went on for several years. And the mom cleaned houses. My brother, who was 3.5 years older than I, worked before he went to school in the mornings, and would go to where the paper boys would pick up their papers and see that they got out on their routes. Then he would do his route. And he was, I think, in junior high then.
Wow.
And then after school he would go to where the boys would pick up the papers, and that was the Des Moines Tribune. We lived in Ames, 32 miles away. And so he would see that the boys got their papers. And I don't know if he had an afternoon route or not, probably did. And then that money went into the family. And my dad did whatever he could do, and of course my sister and I were still in grammar school, so we couldn't,
Work,
contribute much. But then it just got to the point where, well, another day I came home from school. It was winter time. My mother had hung up blankets over the kitchen door, and by that time our gas had been turned off, so we had to have a quarter to put in the meter. And she'd be in the middle of cooking a meal, and the meter would go off, so she'd have to find a quarter someplace. And there was no coal, well, very little, and so she would get my sister and I and my brother off to school in the morning, then she'd go to bed to keep warm, so she wouldn't use any heat in the house, any coal. And then when my sister and my brother wasn't coming home for lunch at that time, I don't remember why, but then we had, my sister and I at our age in grammar school had to go home for lunch. And there was no, and that time in that area at least, there was no support for people in our condition. I don't know that my parents would have asked for it.
Right. It wasn't the tradition. Yeah.
And so then after Lola and I would go back to school, my mother would go back to bed until we got home from school. Then she would get up and use coal to heat the house for us. And in the meantime, while she was cleaning other people's houses as much as possible, well, it just got, and we were the only ones in the neighborhood who had not paid that I was aware of. And we had to use kerosene lanterns. Nobody else in the neighborhood had.
They all had electricity?
Yeah, because they could pay their electricity bill. We couldn't. And so things just really got bad. So I think probably with my mother's pushing, they sold everything. They sent my sister and I probably to Des Moines to be with the family while they got rid of everything. By that time I think the car was gone. They sold the furniture, anything. And I remember hearing talk, and like I say, they were protecting us from this as much as possible. And I remember people, talking, and I kind of have a vague picture in my mind of people in the front yard and my parents' stuff
Mm-hmm.
being bid on. So I
Mhm.
think there was an
Auction.
auctioneer. And so then we moved to Des Moines, and I went into 8th grade there. I'd finished 7th grade in Ames. My sister had finished 6th, and my brother was to go as a senior into high school, and he'd gone through school in Ames, and here his senior year of high school he had to move. But anyway, he did go into his senior year, and I went into 8th grade, and Lola went into 7th grade, and it was a bad year. Another bad year, because my sister and mother and I lived with an aunt and uncle, my dad's sister, and we had a little dog. This might make me cry. And my aunt hated dogs. So, we lived with them. We were on charity, and my brother and father lived with his mother and sister and her sister's husband, so we were split
Split
up.
up.
Neither one of them could take 5 of us.
Right, right.
And so I came home from school just after we'd been there with Aunt Lottie and Uncle Frank and Bob, their son, for a week or 2, and the dog was gone. And I wrote a poem.
Do you remember that poem?
No, I don't, and I've had it for a long time.
Yeah.
It was just, it's so sad.
Well, and that's where poems come from, is that,
Yeah.
that real
Yeah.
ache in your
And
heart.
I don't think I ever forgave Aunt Lottie for that.
Yeah.
Anyway, then we lived, the 3 of us lived with Aunt Lottie and Uncle Frank, and my brother and my dad lived with my grandmother. And even at that age, I knew that we were not all that welcome with Aunt Lottie and
Yeah.
Uncle Frank. We were, well,
Yeah. Not what they had sort of planned on.
yeah. And so then finally, and Mom got a job working at Younker's department store, and I think my dad was working part-time too. And then we got a little apartment. But I remember being unhappy enough, pacing. And so I was like 8th grade, went into 8th grade. And evidently there wasn't room for my dad to be in this apartment. I think maybe there was a limit of the number of people that could be in it, and it was just a flat over
Right.
a house. I remember my brother cooking, and he didn't have a job, but my mother worked part-time at Younker's, and once in a while my dad would get a job at Younker's. And part of the time my dad cooked for us, part of the time my brother cooked. They would go back and
Split
forth.
off, yeah.
Yeah. And I don't remember hearing about moving to California, but what I suspect is that my mother's family here in California sent money for us to get to California.
Mm-hmm.
And all of a sudden we were going to move to California. And I remember thinking it has to be better than this. And I had been to California, I'm not sure, either 2 or 3 times in my childhood to visit my family out here. And I had a grandmother and an aunt and a couple of uncles and some cousins. And so everything, all our furniture and everything was gone. And my folks got in contact with somebody where you would drive a car to California. And they paid for the gas, and,
You all got to ride in the car.
Yeah, you could sell the car. They could sell the car after they got here. Well, they knew a woman who wanted to go to California too. So they packed everything. So there were 6 of us moving to California. This lady, Maureen, she was kind of funny. And so they put most of the stuff in the cars. There were 3 of us in each car. And we did stop at some motels on the way. I don't know where that money came from. But we did stop in motels and arrived in California and felt welcome here by my grandmother and my aunts and my uncles. I don't remember feeling the way in California that I had felt in Des Moines with my aunt and uncle. And there was no outward disagreement with any of,
Right.
of the Iowa relatives.
Right.
It was just that this aunt was more selfish and you know, her life was being disturbed. She had
Right.
one son, is all she'd had, and here 2 teenage girls
Girls.
are dumped on her, and her son was still living at home. And so, you know, I don't want anybody to feel that
No,
there
no.
was animosity there or anything. But I never really completely forgave her for the dog.
Now, was the depression less out here because?
Oh, yes, much less out here. We stayed with my grandmother, and of course she only had a 2-bedroom house. And my aunt and my uncle, who had never married, and my grandmother lived together in this 2-bedroom house. And here, 5 of us were dumped on them.
Mhm.
But I don't know, I don't remember feeling.
Right, the inconvenience that
Yeah,
you had felt,
yeah.
yeah.
And I had a cousin who was, my parents had helped raise her and her brother, Ken. So, you know, they were close to my mother and father. And so then some way or other, my mother and dad got employment taking care of a lady in San Leandro who had kind of a boarding house sort of thing. She didn't cook for them, but there was a dentist renting a room there and a prize fighter renting a room there. My mother and father slept on a bed in the dining area, and my mother took care of Mrs. Welch, who was an elderly lady. And this was on Broadmoor Boulevard.
Oh.
Do you know where that is?
I don't.
99 Broadmoor Boulevard off East 14th.
Oh.
Nice area. And so, you know, as soon as we could, you know, get away
Yeah.
from, and that was temporary too, because then my mother got a job. Well, she took care of Mrs. Welch for several months. I don't remember just how many months. I know I started 9th grade at San Leandro High School. My sister started 8th grade. And this cousin of mine who was, she's 13 years older than I. And of course we were from Iowa, you know, we were different.
Right.
And still Iowa people, now don't take offense at it, but it's still different.
It's a different culture.
Yes, entirely different. Our hair was wrong, our clothing was wrong for us to start into school. And
That's
my
right.
cousin saw to it that my sister and I had perms. I
Okay.
cried the first time I had a perm.
So you'd fit in.
Yeah, she saw to it that we knew. So, and I don't remember being teased or made fun of or
Oh,
anything
good.
when
Oh,
I
good.
started 9th grade here in California. But she saw to it that we had what we needed, like you say,
Yeah.
to fit in. And I'll always be grateful to her for that. And so starting school, I don't remember any trauma.
Oh, that's wonderful. And then you stayed in San Leandro
Yeah.
High for those 4
Yeah,
years?
graduated from San Leandro High
Oh, that's
School,
great.
class of 1940. But in the meantime, my brother got a job shortly, well, not too much longer, and he'd only graduated from high school, but he got a job with IBM. My dad got a job with Conn's. My mother got a job at Montgomery Ward. My sister and I babysat for people that, you
Yeah.
know, in the neighborhood. My grandmother had a house that she owned. I don't know, she owned her own house. She owned a house, another house in San Leandro that she rented out. And she owned her own house in San Leandro on Alice Avenue. So some way or other, she had accumulated, and she didn't
Yeah.
work. My aunt worked, my uncle worked who lived with her. But then it was up, 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 up
That's
from the
great.
time we arrived in California. Of course, like I say, my brother had just graduated from high school, but then, and started to work for IBM, and he ended up graduating from college, going to night school
Oh, that's great.
after he was married. I wanted to be a nurse, and my mother just really talked me out of it because my health was fragile. And should I quit?
We can take a break